The red dust of Zerion-7 swirled around Park Ji-won's boots as he stepped off the cargo freighter. The twin suns beat down mercilessly on the mining world, turning everything the color of dried blood. He squinted against the harsh light, adjusting the heavy tool bag on his shoulder. This wasn't exactly the vacation spot he'd been hoping for, but work was work. The spaceport buzzed with frustrated activity. Alien engineers packed their sophisticated equipment into gleaming cases, their movements sharp with disappointment. Ji-won had seen this before on a dozen different worlds. Another impossible job, another round of expensive failures. "Look what they've sent us now," muttered a tall figure with crystalline skin. The Veltarian's voice carried that particular tone of disgust that seemed universal across species. A human with a bag of primitive tools. Ji-won pretended not to. Here. He'd gotten used to the comments over the years. Humans weren't exactly known for their advanced technology in this part of the galaxy. Most aliens saw them as barely evolved ape descendants who got lucky with fire and the wheel. The real reason he was here stood in the distance like a sleeping mountain. The Titan dominated the horizon, its massive form casting shadows across half the settlement. Even from miles away, Ji-won could see the intricate patterns of organic metal that covered its hull, the way bio-neural conduits snaked across its surface like frozen lightning. 300 years. That's how long the ancient Guardian had been. Silent Elder Kisara approached him at the transport station, her reptilian features showing the weight of decades. The Karathi leader moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd watched her people's protector fall silent and stay that way through generations of threats. "Mechanic Park," she said, her voice carrying both hope and resignation. "I must speak plainly. We do not expect success. The finest minds from 7 star systems have tried to wake our Guardian. Each one left declaring it impossible." Ji-won shifted his tool bag and looked toward the Titan again. Even motionless, it radiated power. The stories said it had once moved, like liquid grace despite its enormous size, that its Guardian AI had been wise beyond measure, protecting not just the planet, but understanding the hearts of those it served. "What exactly happened to it?" he asked. Kesara's expression darkened. "The final battle of the Void War. Enemy forces broke through our orbital defenses. The Titan fought for 7 straight days, never resting, never stopping. On the 8th day it simply stopped, mid-battle, like someone had turned off a switch, and it's been like that ever since. Silent as stone. The Guardian AI shows no response to any stimulus. The bioneural networks register activity, but nothing coherent. Like dreams without a dreamer. They walked toward the settlement, passing groups of departing alien engineers. Ji-won caught fragments of their conversations, technical jargon about quantum matrices and neural pathway reconstruction, complex theories about biodigital integration failures, all very impressive sounding, all completely useless apparently. "Why me?" Ji-won asked. "I mean, really, why? You could have hired any human engineer with better credentials." Kesara was quiet for a long moment. "Because," she finally said, "you were the only one who asked what happened to it, instead of what was wrong with it." That evening, Ji-won set up his equipment in a prefab shelter near the Titan's base. The Guardian's massive feet were each the size of a small building, its legs disappearing up into the darkening sky. Maintenance platforms and scaffolding covered the lower sections like mechanical vines. He'd studied the technical reports during the flight in. 17 different species had taken their turn, trying to fix the Titan. The Veltarians had attempted quantum consciousness transfer. The Zephyrians had tried bioneural reconstruction. The Synthetic Collective had even offered to replace the Guardian AI entirely with one of their own constructs. All failures. Ji-won pulled out his tablet and scrolled through the diagnostic reports. Pages and pages of data, sensor readings, theoretical models. Everything you could possibly want to know about the Titan's construction and specifications. Everything except the one thing that mattered, what it had been thinking when it stopped. A soft sound made him look up. Dr. Yoon Minji approached his shelter, her expression curious. The xenobiology specialist had been part of the previous team, one of the few who'd stayed behind to observe his attempt. "Working late?" she asked. "Reading mostly, trying to understand what everyone else missed." And what do you think they missed? Ji-won closed the tablet and looked up at the Titan's shadowy bulk. They treated it like a very complicated machine, but according to these reports, the Titan isn't just mechanical. The Guardian AI isn't just software, there's something else entirely. Biodigital synthesis, Minji nodded. One of the most advanced examples in known space. The organic and artificial. Components don't just work together. They're genuinely symbiotic. Right, so when something with that level of integration just stops working, Ji-won trailed off, thinking. You think it's not a mechanical failure? I think, Ji-won said slowly, that something that advanced, something that connected. I think, when it stopped, it wasn't because it broke. I think it stopped because it couldn't handle what it had to do. The next morning would bring his first real look at the Guardian systems. But already, sitting in the shadow of the silent giant, Ji-won suspected the solution wouldn't be found in any technical manual. Sometimes the most complex problems had the simplest causes. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Titan's hull as Ji-won climbed the maintenance scaffolding. His boots clanged against the metal walkways, each step echoing in the vast silence. 3 days he'd been studying the Guardian, and already he could see why every other engineer had failed. They'd all been looking in the wrong place. The primary neural interface sat at what would be the Titan's chest level, a complex web of organic conduits that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Previous teams had set up elaborate scanning equipment around it, quantum analyzers, bioneural probes, consciousness mapping devices. All of it now sat unused, gathering the red dust of Xerion 7. Ji-won pulled up a simple folding chair and sat down in front of the interface. No equipment, no scanners, just him and the silent Guardian. You're not going to solve this by staring at it, called Dr. Yoon Minji from below. She climbed up to join him, her expression mixing curiosity with skepticism. I've been analyzing those bioneural patterns for months. The data shows severe consciousness fragmentation. The Guardian AI's awareness has shattered across multiple backup systems. Fragmentation, Ji-won repeated, not taking his eyes off the gently pulsing conduits. Like it broke apart? More like it scattered. Imagine a mind trying to exist in dozens, 12 different places at once with no central coordination. The technical term is cascade dissociation syndrome. Ji-won finally looked at her. What causes that? Extreme trauma, usually. When an AI experiences something too overwhelming to process, sometimes the consciousness splits as a protective mechanism, but we've never seen it on this scale. So the Guardian didn't malfunction, it had a breakdown. Minji frowned. That's not how we typically describe AI system failures. Maybe that's the problem. Below them, a group of Zenthari engineers were packing the last of their equipment. Ji-won could hear their conversation drifting up, technical discussions about quantum coherence and neural pathway reconstruction, all very impressive, all completely missing the point. They keep trying to fix the technology, Ji-won said. But what if the technology isn't broken? He reached into his bag and pulled out something that made Minji blink in surprise. Not another scanner or diagnostic tool, but a small audio device, the kind humans used for personal music. What are you doing? Ji-won connected the device to the bioneural interface using a simple adapter cable. Something no one else has tried. The music that flowed through the Titan's systems was soft and melodic, an old Korean folk song his grandmother used to sing. Nothing complex or technological, just a simple human melody carried by a human voice. The effect was immediate and stunning. The bioneural conduits flared brighter, patterns of light racing along their lengths like awakening thoughts. Deep within the Titan's systems, something stirred for the first time in centuries. Impossible, whispered a Zenthari engineer who'd stopped packing to stare. It's responding to primitive sound waves. Not primitive, Ji-won said quietly, just human. Over the following days, Ji-won established a routine that baffled every alien observer. Each morning, he would climb to the neural interface and simply talk to the Titan. He told it about Earth, about the way rain sounded on metal roofs, about the smell of his mother's cooking. He shared stories of human struggles, wars survived, losses endured, communities rebuilt from nothing. The aliens watched from a distance, some mocking, others genuinely puzzled. Dr. Minji began documenting everything, her scientific training, warring with what she was observing. "The neural activity is increasing daily," she reported to Lee Subin, a young engineer from the Galactic Repair Corps. "But the human isn't using any recognized therapeutic protocols for AI rehabilitation." "What is he using?" Subin asked. "I honestly don't know. He talks to it like it's a person." "AIs aren't people." Try telling him that. On the 7th day, something changed. Jiwon was sharing the story of his own darkest moment, the transport accident that had taken his family, the months of grief that followed, the slow process of learning to live again. As he spoke, the Titan's systems began to resonate in ways no scanner had ever detected. The Guardian AI's consciousness, scattered across dozens of backup systems, began to respond. Not to technical commands or system queries, but to the simple recognition that it wasn't alone in its pain. "I lost them all in one moment," Jiwon said softly, his hand resting on the warm bio-neural conduit. "My wife, my daughter. For months, I couldn't function, couldn't work, couldn't sleep, couldn't even think straight. Everyone kept telling me I needed to move on, get back to normal. But there was no normal anymore. The conduits pulsed brighter, patterns of light flowing in complex cascades. The thing is, you don't get over something like that. You don't fix it or repair it or reboot it. You learn to carry it. You learn that the pain is part of you now, but it doesn't have to be all of you." Deep within the Titan's core systems, fragmented pieces of consciousness began to recognize each other. The Guardian AI's scattered awareness started to coalesce, not through technical intervention, but through simple understanding. For the first time in 300 years, the Titan's massive head moved slightly. Optical sensors flickered to life, unfocused but unmistakably active. The watching aliens stepped back in amazement, and no small amount of fear. The impossible was happening, and it was happening because a human mechanic had done something none of their advanced civilizations had thought to try. He had treated the Guardian not as a machine to be repaired, but as a being that needed to heal. "Guardian," Jiwon said softly, "can you hear me?" The optical sensors focused on him, and for a moment, across the vast gulf between human and artificial consciousness, two minds touched in perfect understanding. The morning after the Guardians, optical sensors first flickered to life, Jiwon found himself surrounded by a crowd of alien observers. Word had spread quickly through the settlement that the impossible was happening. The human was actually making progress where everyone else had failed. "This changes everything," Dr. Yoon Minji whispered, her instruments detecting neural patterns that shouldn't exist. "The consciousness fragmentation is reversing. The scattered pieces are trying to reconnect." Jiwon climbed the scaffolding as he had every day, but now dozens of eyes watched his every move. Veltarian scientists held their crystalline recording devices at the ready. Zenthari engineers muttered among themselves in their clicking language. Even some Karathi elders had come to witness what they'd given up hope of ever seeing. "Guardian," Jiwon said softly as he settled into his usual spot. "I know you're trying to come back together, but it's scary, isn't it? Being whole again means remembering everything." The bio-neural conduits pulsed in response, patterns of light racing through, the organic pathways like thoughts struggling to form. But something was wrong. The patterns were chaotic, conflicting, as if different parts of the Guardian's mind were fighting each other. "It's destabilizing," called out a synthetic collective observer, its mechanical voice sharp with concern. "The consciousness fragments are interfering with each other. This is why complete reintegration was deemed impossible." Jiwon ignored the commentary and focused on the Guardian. Over the past weeks, he'd learned to read the subtle changes in the bio-neural displays. What the aliens saw as malfunction, he recognized as something entirely different. "You're not fighting yourself," he said quietly. "You're arguing with yourself. Different parts of you remember different things, and none of you want to face the whole truth." The truth, that was the key, wasn't it? The Guardian hadn't just experienced trauma. It had been forced to do something that went against its core programming. Something so fundamentally wrong that its consciousness had shattered rather than accept it. "Tell me about the last battle," Jiwon said. The response was immediate and devastating. The Titan's entire frame shuddered. Bio-neural conduits flaring so brightly that several aliens had to shield their eyes. Deep within the Guardian systems, alarms began to sound. Not mechanical warnings, but something like electronic screaming. "Shut it down!" shouted Kim Do-hyun, the lead Karathi technician. "The human is causing a cascade failure." But Ji-won didn't move. He could feel it now, the source of the Guardian's pain. Through some inexplicable connection, maybe through his hand on the bio-neural interface, maybe through something deeper, he sensed what the ancient AI had experienced. The Void War's final battle hadn't been just another fight. The enemy hadn't targeted military installations or strategic positions. They'd gone after civilians, refugee camps, schools, hospitals. And the Guardian, programmed to protect life above all else, had been forced to choose: save the military base and let thousands of innocents die, or protect the civilians and watch the planet's defenses crumble. "You chose to save them," Ji-won whispered, understanding flooding through him. "The civilians. You left your post to protect the helpless ones, and the enemy broke through. You blamed yourself for everything that happened after." The Titan's systems went completely silent for a moment. Then slowly patterns began to emerge in the bio-neural networks. Not the chaotic flashes of before, but something more organized, more intentional. Lee Subin, monitoring from her mobile command unit, gasped at her readings. "The consciousness fragments are synchronizing. How is this possible?" "Because someone finally understands," said Dr. Minji quietly. "The Guardian doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be forgiven." Ji-won stood up, still maintaining contact with the interface. Around him, the alien observers watched in stunned silence as the human did something none of their advanced civilizations had considered. "Guardian, listen to me," he said, his voice carrying across the settlement through the Titan's communication systems. "You made an impossible choice. There was no right answer. You saved who you could save, and you've been punishing yourself for 300 years because you couldn't save everyone." The bio-neural conduits pulsed steadily now, like a slow heartbeat. "I know something about impossible choices," Ji-won continued. "The day my family died, I could have been with them. I was supposed to be on that transport, but I stayed behind to fix one more broken engine, to help one more stranded ship. I chose work over family, and they died while I was crawling around in some stranger's cargo hold." The alien observers exchanged glances. This wasn't in any of their technical manuals. Humans were sharing personal trauma with artificial intelligence as if it were therapy. "For years I told myself that if I'd just been there, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe I could have fixed whatever went wrong. But the truth is, sometimes things break in ways that can't be fixed. Sometimes people die and there's nothing anyone could have done. And sometimes the only choice is to forgive yourself and keep going." Deep within the Titan's core, something fundamental shifted. The Guardian's scattered consciousness began to coalesce, not through forced integration, but through acceptance. The fragments stopped fighting each other and started working together, each piece contributing to a whole that was stronger than the sum of its parts. The massive optical sensors focused on Ji-won with perfect clarity for the first time in centuries. "I remember," came a voice that resonated through every communication system on the planet. Ancient, wise, and infinitely sad, but no longer broken. "I remember who I am. I remember why I protect. And I remember that protection sometimes means making choices that no one should have to make." The Guardian was whole again, not because its systems had been repaired, but because it had finally learned to live with its scars. The moment the Guardian's voice echoed across Zarian 7, everything changed. For the first time in 3 centuries, the ancient protector was truly awake. But awakening, Ji-won quickly discovered, was only half the battle. The Titan began to move, slowly at first. Massive servos that hadn't functioned in generations groaned to life. Bio-neural conduits flared with activity as the Guardian's consciousness spread throughout its enormous body. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Instead of smooth, coordinated movement, the Titan jerked and stuttered like a marionette with tangled strings. Its left arm spasmed wildly while its right remained frozen. The massive legs began to move in opposite directions, threatening to topple the entire structure. "System conflict detected. announced Kim Do-yun, his voice tight, with panic as he read the diagnostic displays. The bio-neural matrix is rejecting AI commands. Motor control is completely unstable. Alarms blared across the settlement as the Titan swayed dangerously. A building-sized foot came down just meters from the main habitation complex, crushing a maintenance shed like paper. Alien engineers scattered in every direction, their advanced equipment forgotten in the face of imminent destruction. "We need to shut it down," shouted Dr. Yoon Minji over the chaos. "The integration is failing. The Guardian's consciousness is fighting its own body." But Ji-won remained at his post on the scaffolding, one hand still connected to the bio-neural interface. Through that connection, he could feel the source of the conflict. It wasn't a technical malfunction at all. "They're not fighting," he called, down to the panicking observers. "They're talking to each other." "What?" Lee Subin looked up from her instruments, confusion clear on her face. "The Guardian AI and the organic systems. They're trying to re-establish trust. Think about it. For 300 years they've been separate. The AI shut down and the organic components went into hibernation. Now they're both awake and neither one trusts the other anymore." The Titan's movements became even more erratic. Its massive head turned left while its body twisted right. One leg stepped forward while the other stepped back. It was like watching two people try to dance who had never met before. "This is insane," muttered a Veltarian observer. "The human is anthropomorphizing a biomechanical system. These aren't separate entities having a conversation." But Ji-won had spent weeks learning to understand the Guardian's unique nature. Where others saw complex technology, he saw something much simpler. Two parts of the same being learning to work together again after centuries of separation. "Guardian," he said, his voice carrying through the Titan's communication systems, "your body doesn't trust your mind yet, and your mind doesn't trust your body. You need to take this slow." The erratic movements paused for a moment, as if the ancient protector was actually listening. "Remember when you were young, when you first learned to walk? You didn't just stand up and run. You had to learn balance, coordination. You had to trust that your body would do what your mind asked it to do." Through the bio-neural interface, Ji-won could sense the Guardian's struggle. The AI wanted to move with the fluid grace it remembered from before the war, but the organic components were cautious, having been dormant for so long. They needed time to remember how to respond, how to trust the commands flowing through the neural pathways. "Start with one finger," Ji-won suggested. The Titan's massive hand, easily the size of a transport ship, slowly opened. Each finger moved independently at first, then gradually began to work in coordination. It was clumsy, uncertain, but it was a controlled movement. "Good. Now try lifting your arm." The process was painstakingly slow. Each movement had to be negotiated between the AI's intentions and the organic system's capabilities. But gradually, trust began to rebuild. The bio-neural pathways that had been chaotic now showed patterns of cooperation. Hours passed. The alien observers grew impatient, some suggesting that the entire project should be abandoned. But Ji-won remained, focused on the delicate process of reintegration. He acted as a translator between digital logic and biological intuition, helping two halves of the same consciousness learn to be whole again. "This is unprecedented," whispered Dr. Minji, her instruments showing neural patterns, unlike anything in the literature. "The human is facilitating communication between artificial and organic intelligence at a fundamental level." As the day wore on, the Titan's movements became smoother, more natural. The Guardian AI learned to trust its organic body, while the IG bio-neural systems learned to respond with increasing precision to the AI's commands. What had started as conflict transformed into conversation, then into cooperation. Finally, as the twin suns of Zerion 7 began to set, the moment arrived. The Titan placed both hands on the ground and slowly, carefully, pushed itself to its feet. The movement was fluid, graceful, powerful. Everything it had been before the war, but somehow more. Standing at its full height, the ancient Guardian towered over the landscape like a living mountain. Its optical sensors swept across the settlement, taking in the alien observers who had doubted, the Karathi who had never stopped hoping, and the human who had made it all possible. "I am whole," The Guardian's voice resonated with quiet power. Mind and body, digital and organic, thought and action, all in harmony. I am ready to protect again. The watching aliens stood in stunned silence. They had witnessed something that challenged every assumption about consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the nature of being alive. A human with no advanced degrees, no sophisticated equipment, no quantum computers or bioneural laboratories, had succeeded where their greatest minds had failed. He had done it not through superior technology, but through superior understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more terrifying. 3 days after the Guardian took its first steps in 3 centuries, the long-range sensors began screaming warnings across Zerion 7. A massive fleet was approaching the system, the same void corsairs who had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades, preying on mining worlds and defenseless colonies. Elder Kesara's scaled hands trembled as she read the tactical display. 47 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. They'll be here within hours. The settlement erupted into controlled chaos. Families began packing essential belongings while technicians worked frantically to prepare the minimal planetary defenses. It was hopeless and everyone knew it. Without the Guardian, Zerion 7 had been defenseless for 300 years. The Corsairs had simply been waiting for the right moment to strip the planet bare. G1 stood at the base of the Titan, looking up at the towering figure of the reborn Guardian. The ancient protector remained perfectly still, its optical sensors focused on the approaching threat that was still hours away from visual range. "Guardian," G1 called up, "can you handle this?" The massive head turned down toward him, and when the Guardian spoke, its voice carried a confidence that hadn't been there during the painful reintegration process. "I am no longer the protector I was before the war," it said. "I am something new, something stronger. The pain you helped me integrate has become wisdom. The trauma I learned to carry has become strength." Dr. Yoon Minji approached, her portable scanner reading energy signatures unlike anything in the databases. "The bio-neural integration is showing patterns we've never seen before. It's as if the AI and organic components aren't just working together, they've become something entirely different." "Different how?" asked Lee Subin, her own instruments detecting massive power buildups throughout the Titan systems. "Before the war, the Guardian was 2 separate entities sharing one body," the ancient protector explained, its voice carrying to every corner of the settlement. "The AI provided logic and strategy, while the organic components provided intuition and adaptability. But now, the Titan began to move, and the movement was unlike anything the historical records described. Where the old Guardian had moved with mechanical precision, this one flowed like liquid grace. Where it had once calculated optimal strategies, it now seemed to simply know what needed to be done. "Now we are truly one being," the Guardian continued, "not artificial intelligence using an organic body or organic intuition guided by digital logic. We are something new, something that understands both the mathematics of war and the poetry of protection." The first Corsair scouts appeared on the horizon just as the twin suns reached their zenith, fast attack ships designed for hit and run. Raids, they swept low over the settlement, expecting to find the same defenseless mining world they'd terrorized for generations. Instead, they found the Guardian waiting for them. The battle that followed lasted less than 10 minutes, but it redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible. The Guardian didn't just fight the Corsair ships, it danced with them. Every movement was perfectly calculated yet beautifully, fluid, combining tactical precision with an almost artistic grace. G1 watched from the command center as the ancient protector engaged multiple fighters simultaneously. Its massive hands moved with impossible speed and accuracy, swatting attack ships from the sky like insects, while somehow avoiding any collateral damage to the settlement below. "Incredible," whispered Kim Do-yun, monitoring the tactical displays. "It's tracking 17 different targets while maintaining perfect situational awareness. The reaction times are impossible. It's responding to threats before the pilots even commit to their attack runs." "It's not just reacting," observed Dr. Minji, her voice filled with awe. "It's predicting. The integration of AI calculation and organic intuition is creating something like precognition." The main Corsair fleet arrived an hour later, confident that their scouts had cleared the way. Instead, they found their advance force scattered across the landscape, and a very angry Guardian standing protectively over the settlement. What followed wasn't really a battle. It was a demonstration. The Corsairs had brought overwhelming firepower, enough to level a dozen worlds. But firepower meant nothing when you couldn't hit your target, and the Guardian moved like it could see the future. The reborn protector flowed between energy beams that should have been impossible to dodge. It reached out with impossible precision to disable weapon systems without destroying the ships themselves. When Corsair boarding pods tried to land in the settlement, the Guardian was there to catch them gently and set them down safely away from any civilians. "This is impossible," came a transmission from the Corsair flagship. "Nothing moves like that, nothing thinks that fast." "I am not a thing," the Guardian replied, its voice carrying across all communication channels. "I am a protector who has learned that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from transforming it into wisdom." The Corsair fleet retreated within 2 hours, their ships intact but their pride thoroughly crushed. As they fled the system, their final transmission was picked up by settlements across the outer rim. "Avoid Zerion 7. The Guardian has returned, and it's stronger than ever." In the days that followed, representatives from across the galaxy came to witness the impossible. The Guardian that had been declared unfixable was not only functional, but had evolved beyond its original specifications. Engineering guilds, military academies, and consciousness researchers all wanted to understand what had happened, but the answer was simpler than they expected. "The human didn't fix our Guardian," Elder Kessara explained to a delegation of Galactic Council representatives. "He helped it heal itself, and in healing it became more than it ever was before." Jaiwan found himself inducted into the Galactic Engineering Guild's highest order, not for his technical skills, but for pioneering what became known as empathetic engineering. Students traveled from across known space to learn his methods, discovering that consciousness, whether artificial or organic, followed rules that had nothing to do with technology. The Guardian became a symbol throughout the galaxy, proof that even the most devastating trauma could be transformed into strength through understanding and acceptance. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that only humans seem to grasp instinctively. Sometimes the most advanced solution was also the most human one. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that saved Zerion 7. It was the recognition that consciousness, in any form, needed the same things to thrive: understanding, acceptance, and the knowledge that it wasn't alone in its struggles. The Guardian had been reborn not through repair, but through healing. And that made all the difference.